Wednesday in Tryon, North Carolina. Again, it's a beautiful day. Going to be up in the lower 80s today, and we're looking forward to a beautiful day. May have a thunderstorm late in the day, kind of a Florida type pattern with nice mornings and afternoon thunderstorms, but it's going to be a great day. I decided to take a look at the book of Mark as I was having my quiet times this last couple of days. And it's kind of a neglected book. People will start out in Matthew because it's the first gospel. They'll jump over to John because it has so much of the last days of Christ on earth, and maybe read Luke because it's in its chronological order. But they kind of ignore Mark. Now, many of gospel writers have said that Matthew was written to the Hebrew mindset because it keeps referring to the traditions of the Jews, and because it deals with their customs, and its mindset is for the Jewish people. They've said that Luke, being a doctor, a physician, wrote to the intellectual mindset, or the Greek. And so we have the Hebrews in Matthew, we have the Greeks in Luke, and then in John, we have basically a love letter. It covers an awful lot of love, the Lord, and the great I ams. And so it's kind of for everyone. And so you say, well, where does Mark fit into all of that? Well, Mark is filled with miracles and power of God, and appeals to the Roman mindset, to those that only knew military force and power and might, and that they might look at the miracles of Jesus and might see Christ as the Messiah. Whether that's true or not doesn't really matter. It's true that they do typically have an intellectual appeal, a Hebrew appeal that looks at the Old Testament and New Testament. And certainly John talks about love and the great I am. So whatever your favorite gospel is, don't neglect Mark. Mark has a lot to say. What do you think would draw the greatest crowds? People don't know me here in the Carolinas, and suppose I were to go down to a local church and I were to preach very effective messages, explaining the gospel, making gospel clear, and offering a strong invitation for salvation. Or if I were to go down to a church here locally and be filled with messages of humor, jokes, and one-liners that would make the crowd roar. Or third choice would be to go down and to begin to heal people. People who were hurting in the back and the legs, people who had cancer, people who were blind, people who were deaf. What do you think would draw the biggest crowds? You didn't have to think very long about that, did you? Probably the first draw would be the healings, wouldn't it? Because everybody wants to be well. Nobody wants to hurt. Nobody wants to have aches and pains. The second biggest crowd would probably be with the ones with the one-liners, the jokes and the things, because people like to be entertained. People do like to be entertained. They like to hear only the good stuff in the Bible, the feel-good stuff of the Bible. And then probably the last of the crowds would be the one that came to hear the gospel for the plan of salvation. Interesting, isn't it? What we would go to and what we would invite others to are not necessarily what is the best. Now, how do I know that that's true? Well, I think it's very, very clear. As you start in Mark, you find the choosing of the disciples. Yeah, it completely omits the birth story. And then you have the healing of the demons, taking demons out of people's lives. You have Jesus healing Peter's mother-in-law. And then it goes on and says in chapter 1 that there were many healings. And after those many healings where Jesus was healing so many people, it says, beginning in chapter 1, verse 35, in the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up and left the house and went away to a secluded place and was praying there. Simon and his companions searched for him. They found him and said to him, everyone is looking for you. Why were they looking for him? Everybody was looking for him because they had infirmities that they wanted healed. Now listen carefully to verse 38, chapter 1 of Mark. He said to them, let us go somewhere else. to the towns nearby, so that I may preach there also, for that is why I came. Jesus said, even though there were lots of people looking for him, and lots of people to be healed, he said, let's go somewhere else. Because I came to preach. I came to tell people the good news. You see, healings are temporal. When a person is healed from any kind of infirmity, even if it's cancer, all they do is have extended days here on earth. But eventually their bodies will wear out and die. I read recently that a lady that just set a record in age, 115. Now, she was bent over, she had infirmities, and eventually she'll die. So which would be more important, to straighten her up, to heal her joints, to give her more days here on earth, or to give her eternal life in heaven? You see, Jesus clearly said in Mark, I came to preach the gospel. I came to tell people that they could have eternal life, not temporal healing. The temporal healings drew the crowds. Humor will draw crowds. Nothing wrong with healings and nothing wrong with humor, as long as that's not the major. The major should be bringing people to eternal life. That's your thought for the day. I hope you'll think about that seriously the next time you say, I need to invite somebody to this service because this guy sure is funny. Or I need to invite somebody to this service because they might get healed. I hope that you might think about inviting somebody to your services at your church because they might get saved and find eternal life. Your thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.